Hello and welcome to everyone listening to the Written In Melanin podcast, the place where you come to get your weekly dose of melanated creativity. I'm your host, CM Lockhart, an author of fantasy books featuring Black girls who aren't all that nice, and the owner of the Melanin Library, an online database of books written by Black authors. And in this space, I share with you everything I've learned on my journey as a Black and indie author. I'm glad you're here. And today, you guys, I am here with Brianna Peppins. She is the author of the young adult contemporary books, including As Long As We're Together and the Briarcliff Prep series. She was raised in PG County, Maryland, and graduated from Spelman College with a BA in psychology. When not writing, Brianna takes special interest in spending time with her loved ones, social justice issues, and is a self-proclaimed movie aficionado. And she is here today, so welcome to the podcast, Brianna.
Hi, guys. It's so nice to be here. This is my very first podcast.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my very first one, and I listen to them often, so I'm excited.
I'm excited to have you. I'm glad that I get to be your first one. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that being said, since this is your first podcast, can you please let our listeners know in your own words who you are, what you do, etc., etc.?
Yes. Well, like you said, my name is Brianna Peppins. I was born in Maryland, went to, all my regular schools and stuff, and then ended up at Spelman College for college in Atlanta, Georgia, which is my home in my heart, but I'm in Maryland right now. And so while I was at Spelman, I went ahead and had the idea for Briarcliff Prep, and I have it right here. So I'll just hold it up. And then As Long As We're Together, but I wrote Briarcliff Prep first, which is now a series. The second book comes out November 19th of 2024, which I'm very, very excited about. And yeah, I'm excited to talk about my publishing process as well.
It's going to be great because I have a ton of questions for you.
Okay.
But before we get into the questions that I have here, I want to ask you about Spelman and kind of what was your choice to go there. Part of the reason being that, if you're listening to this in the future, we are in a current era where, affirmative action is going away. DEI is what it is. And, there are a lot of places that are kind of trying to defund HBCUs. And there's another book coming out that is very HBCU promoted. So
yeah,
since you actually went to one and I also went to one, I went to A&T, I would like to know, kind of what was your thought process in choosing Spelman?
So actually, Spelman wasn't something that was like always on my heart, I guess you could say. I had applied to about 10 schools, I think, and Spelman was the last one. My best friend at the time was just like, we should apply together. What if we end up going there together? I was like, I don't think I have the academics for it, but sure, I can apply if you want me to. Ended up applying, and while I was waiting to hear back, I went to this HBCU tour that my mother signed me up for, and me and my cousin went together, and I just had such a great time. I remember I went to Virginia State, and I was like, okay, this is the school for me. Then I went to NCAT, and I was like, oh, this is my school, absolutely. I bought an Aggie sweatshirt and everything. Yeah. Loved it, loved the campus. And then I went to Clark Atlanta, and I really, really liked it too. But then there was something about finally, and Spelman was the last destination. Went to Spelman, and I just fell so in love with the school, with the campus, with the people, my tour guide too at the time. And I just knew that that's where I really, really, really wanted to be. And when we were riding on our bus ride back home, I got the call from my mom that I had a package, and she was like, can you please open it? And I was like, sure, go ahead. And I had got accepted to Spelman like that. So like I said, it wasn't like something that I had always dreamed of, but it ended up being my dream school and my perfect fit. I still say it was the best decision of my young adult life. And funny enough, Spelman was the only HBCU that I applied to. So I'm just really, really happy and lucky that I ended up there.
Well, I'm glad that you ended up there too, because slight plug before we get into everything else, I am very pro HBCU just because it's such a family and a community and such a different experience. Like when I talk to other people about their college experience, if they didn't go to one, I'm just kind of like, wow, that is not what it was like at A&T at all. And I'm always a huge proponent of it. So when I saw originally Briarcliff Prep, because it came out in 2022, when I saw it, I was like, oh my God, this cover is gorgeous. But I was also like, oh, it's based off of, an HBCU culture, specifically, you know, because you went to Spelman and what that was like. And I was like, oh, okay. And I'm very much a proponent of putting Black spaces into books and being like, yes, we have our own spaces, and it functions a lot differently than a lot of the other spaces that we usually are in. But that being said, I'm kind of curious about like, what's your take on that? Because, you know, traditional publishing, we all know that it is very white and has a very specific narrative that they like to accept, I guess, into their ranks. So what was it like for you creating a story? You know, I saw your Instagram that was basically like, it's like, what if Ashley Banks went to an all-girls boarding school, you know? And I'm like, that is, I love that because Fresh Prince, right? It's like, it's very...
Loved it.
I don't know. It's like if you get it, you get it. If you know, you know. And obviously, everyone loved the Fresh Prince. But I was just like, oh, okay. Now I can see it. Especially when you had a different world up on the computer. I was like, oh, this is hitting all of the notes. I love it.
Exactly. Yeah, hitting the notes of people specifically in my age range. That really gets you guys going, which is great. But I also, you know, try my best to hook it. But the thing about it is that the kids right now don't have something like that, where they see a different world or Ashley Banks and they're like, oh, I have to have it. And so this was hopefully the product that would give them that feel for it. And I absolutely forgot the question that you originally asked. I'm sorry. I was jumping in to what you said last.
You're good. I was just like, you know, what's your take on seeing more Black spaces being depicted in books, specifically within, you know, YA traditional publishing?
I love it. I've been an avid reader my entire life. And my mother was always so great about putting Black books in my hands, from just books. And I have books that I would name. One's called Simply Divine. The other was like the Stephanie Perry Moore series that people have no idea about. But my mother was like, no, I know that there are these people out here who are creating these spaces for you guys. And this was back in, I'm 28 now, so it's 20 years ago, 15 years ago or so, where she was just like, I'm going to find these things for you. And I loved them, but the worlds were like, there were like much bigger adventures, more than just contemporary and just the regular. We're not typically featuring us in that way. So like growing up, I was huge with like the Hunger Games, and I was huge on Twilight even. What else? A series of unfortunate events and stuff.
Yes.
But like we said, they didn't include us. And so now when I am seeing somebody new, feels like weekly, who looks like us and is posting about their book and these fantastic worlds and on these fantastic adventures, it's always so fulfilling. I love to see it. I love whenever I'm able to have the opportunity to speak to teenagers and they're like, well, what books are you like talking about? And I'm just like, I have so many that I can list off the back of my head. So it's been amazing to see. It's reading and writing, we do it all to see a reflection of ourselves, I guess. And so when you can really see yourself reflected, like this is meant for you. My books, Briarcliff Prep, as long as we're together, I would love for everybody to enjoy them. And a lot of different types of people do. But I say specifically who I write for, and that is for Black girls, for Black boys, and these people who need these books. These young people, so that they can see themselves fully for the first time, if it's their first time. And if not, then hopefully it's a continuation of something that will continue going on forever and always.
I love that so much because, you know, I feel like, I don't know if you keep up with what's happening in the bookish community on like Twitter and things, because I saw that your Twitter is like, updates only.
Yeah. So. Not too much anymore.
It's a very wise decision, honestly.
Yeah, since the takeover it's been weird, that space.
It's been very weird, and I think the bookish community as a whole and the way we interact with each other has been a little bit different. So I really love that you are very open and vocal about who you write books for, because I feel like we have somehow navigated into a world or a version of our timeline where authors don't really say that anymore. They're not like, I write for Black boys and Black girls. And if they do, it's in a very different way. Because, you know, from Briarcliff Prep, you know, you're honoring HBCUs by, you know, historically Black boarding schools, right? And it's just like, there's, of course, diversity on every campus, but it is inherently a Black space with Black characters, and it's nice to be like, no, that's intentional, to see us reflected in the stories, and coming of age stories and contemporary, and reflected in ways where it's just like we get to just exist and figure things out. And I feel like having attended an HBCU, that was one of the most glorious parts of being at A&T, where it's just like you're in, I don't want to say a little bubble, but like you're in a community of people where it's just like, for a very rare moment of your life, you're not Black first, you know? It's like you are, but that's not your defining feature. Because if you go to A&T, you can't just be like, oh yeah, it's the Black girl with the blue backpack. You just described half the campus.
Exactly.
So I'm really excited to hear you say that. And so you said something, and it triggered two separate thoughts that kind of go down two different separate roads, but I'll try to get to both of them. The first one being, you know, if you could have people take anything away from your book, like any one thing away from your books, what would it be?
I think that when I am starting any project, I am starting from a point of empathy and caring about one another, and grace. So I would say grace and empathy are my biggest things. In Briarcliff Prep, I touch heavily on domestic violence, something that is very close to my heart. I just care very deeply about it. But sometimes when I find myself slipping into reading reviews accidentally, on purpose, sometimes.
Accidentally on purpose.
Accidentally on purpose, because I never really want to, but I just do. Even after reading, sometimes, typically it's adults, I feel like, more than anybody else who's giving feedback that shows that there was a disconnect where the understanding and empathy should have been, which really does sadden me. But I don't get those types of responses from children, from teenagers, who a lot of them, this is their very first time being exposed to something as severe as domestic violence, and a lot of times it's not. And what is it looking like when a child, basically, because even though we say we are writing for teenagers, but teenagers are children, and I always like to say that over and over again, because it seems like sometimes people forget they're children who are experiencing big things constantly, big emotions, adult emotions even, and still expected to respond to everything either in a childish way, or they're supposed to have the utmost maturity. And so I would like to try to meet them somewhere in the middle, I think, more than anything else. And so I want them to understand that they don't have to have it all together, because most of the time adults do not have it all together, whether it looks like it or not. And I want them to feel seen. I want them to know that the mistakes that they're making right now aren't life-defining moments, or they're life-defining moments, but that doesn't have to be who you are. And so digging deep into domestic violence, victim blaming in Briarcliff Prep, those were the biggest things that I wanted people to see, whereas empathy, and I think I really dug into grace a little bit more with As Long As We're Together. And that's my one where my main character's name is Nova. She's 16, and she is the third of 7 children, and their parents tragically die in a car accident, and the oldest sibling, Ariana, has to get custody of them. And so it's about a custody battle, but it's also about them pushing forward, even though they've had this huge loss, when everybody is basically saying you guys have got to move on, because in order to stay together, you have to move on in a way. But there's a lot of moments in the books where I just have them slowing down a bit, and giving, whether it's a teacher, a supportive fake aunt in the book, and even their social worker and therapist too, finding a way to give these kids a moment to breathe, say that your mistakes are not all consuming in everything, and take a step back, because life is going to keep going on. And so, yeah, grace and empathy are my biggest things. And in my next coming projects, those themes continue, I think, in my books more than anything else.
I love that. And it's one of those things where it's like, obviously I am an adult, so I'm not the target audience of your books, but you know, just hearing you talk about them and what's included in them, especially, you know, like you said, the part about giving yourself grace, because I feel like even as an adult, that's a very hard lesson to learn, and to be like, it's okay to give yourself space to slow down, to breathe, to process. And it's not any fault of your own for being overwhelmed. It's like how you deal with it, how you process it, how you move through it. And it's okay to need support to move through the things that are happening in your life. So honestly, like I said, your books, when I was doing the research for, your interview, I was like, oh, her books sound amazing. Like I wish they had popped up on my timeline, because I saw Briarcliff like everywhere when it came out. And then I was just like, wait, she's got more books. And the second book in the Briarcliff prep series is also coming out. And I'm like, how did I not know this? How was I not aware of this? So I want you to know that your books are now on the shortlist for my TBR, because I'm like, I want to know more about the stories that you are writing. And I would also like to know kind of your take on things, because, this era that we're living in, publishing is different. It's shifting. And a lot of YA books have been trending towards like older YA, almost like adult, right? And, your books, your main character in Briarcliff, she's 14, right?
Yes.
And your second book, oh, Jesus.
As long as we're together.
As long as we're together. I had the we're together part, but I was like, there's something more to this title. But
it's a long one.
But she's 16 in that book, and the things that they're dealing with are very much solid. I'll say solid YA, right? It's not the upper YA range that's been trending lately. So I would like to know, like, what is your take on that, being an author who writes solidly for the, I'll say, target age range for what YA is supposed to be versus the older, almost adult range of it, and, kind of the shift towards that. How do you feel like that's affecting you as an author, and how you're able to reach your readers?
I would say that when I was only a reader, I enjoyed growing with books, I guess you could say. And so I was heavy in a lot of different series of like characters this age, then this age, then this age. And a lot of times I was that age also when I was reading. And I think that it just felt good to see clearly where I was at right now in another person, I guess you could say. And so with Aviel, I basically came up with the idea of Briarcliff Prep because I was thinking, after I'd graduated and was sitting back in my childhood room, what if I had 8 years starting at 14 at my historically Black college instead of just 4? And so I would have started then at 14 years old. And so I just really, really wanted to dig deep into that 14-year-old mindset. And I feel like I did it pretty well, of dialing back the maturity level and still putting these big choices and decisions in Aviel's path. But it was, and even with As Long As We're Together, originally it was supposed to be middle grade, and originally she was 14 when I first started writing. And so I have a couple things in the book that had me age her up to 16, but I wanted to make sure that it still read young. And so, like I said, we're always dealing with these very adult situations, but putting them in a way that is digestible. Because I've had people come up to me, well, not come up to me, but email me and say things about how it's inappropriate that I've written something about as serious as domestic violence in a book that's supposed to be for kids, or a way that I have demonized men or something. Like, I've gotten a lot of different things. Yeah, I see it akin to how a lot of people said in The Color Purple, which is something that I write heavily about in Briarcliff Prep as well. People were saying in The Color Purple when it first came out that basically it demonized Black men because they weren't shown in a good light. And it's just like, well, they weren't always acting in a great light. So everybody's truths have to be shared, have to be seen. But oh gosh, I'm sorry, I lost the topic again. That happens. That might keep happening.
Oh, you're good.
That might keep happening.
Good. The original question is yes.
Sorry.
Like, well,
yeah. So I actually do really enjoy upper YA too when I'm reading it, but I did want to create things that are specifically for the younger, like they're just getting out of middle school, starting high school type of a thing. Because not that you can't ever say that it's a void in whatever category, because somebody's always doing something, but adding to it is what I really, really wanted to do. And so with Briarcliff Prep, if I'm able to continue the series, then right now in the second book of Briarcliff Prep sophomore year, she is going to be 15 years old. And I want her to readers to feel that she is growing with each book. And with As Long as We're Together, which is most certainly going to be a standalone, she is 16, but I would absolutely still put this book in the hands of a 12 or 13-year-old at the same time. I wrote it because with the 16-year-old main character, I knew it would be fine, because I knew that when I was putting it together that, I don't know, when kids are younger, they're always shooting for 16-year-olds, I guess. Like 16 is that big prime age that everybody really, really wants to be.
Sweet 16.
Because exactly, something special comes with that. It's a sweet age. And so I really did want the middle grade readers to be able to pick it up too and be like, oh, this is a sweet 16 type of a book, but I can digest something as hard as teenage caretakers and the death of parents at the same time. So hopefully I accomplished that.
And I think that's really important, because I feel like sometimes in the conversation of like what's appropriate for children, I think people forget that, when you're 12, it's really cool to see another 12-year-old on screen, but you're looking at 13, 14, 15. You're looking at the older kids to kind of get a concept of who you are and what's to come, because, when you're that age, everything is the biggest thing in your life. And when you're trying to process it, you look to other people, but you're not going to look at 12. You're not looking at a 35-year-old to being like, oh, how do you do it? Right? Like, that's too far removed. You're still looking at it and through a child's eyes. And when you're 11, 12, 16, it might as well be an adult. Like, you can drive, homie, you've got independence, you're in high school. And I think, when you bring up like Sweet 16, I think about, how that really is like the sweet spot for being a teenager, because it's just like, you're old enough to be like trusted and respected, and you're really shifting out of, you're no longer a child, but you're still young enough to be like, okay, but you don't have the maturity. I can't treat you like you're 20, 21. Whereas once you start getting to 17, 18, 19, they're like, look, you are too old to be acting like this. And you're like, wait a second, I'm still very much figuring things out. Wait a second. So I'm really glad that you touched on the fact that it's, even though the character is older, it's still meant for a younger audience, and that there is not going to be a void, right? Even though YA is trending in a certain way, there's not going to be a void. There's still books, really good books, that touch on things that are important and need to be discussed, because kind of going back to what you said about The Color Purple and, people not being painted in a good light, I find it interesting that conversation really only comes up when it comes to Black characters and whenever they are in a negative light, because it's just like, it seems in so many ways that, as Black authors, we are not allowed to write complex characters, where it's just like, they are not perfect. They are not meant to be perfect, whether they be morally gray or whether they are purely doing something wrong. It's just like, they are meant to be seen as a person and not a representation of how an entire, culture and race of people are meant to be viewed. It's like, no, just like, you read books with difficult topics in it written by a white author, and it's just like, oh, this character is the issue, and it's not, oh, all white men are like this, or all white women are like this. I find it interesting that same grace isn't given to us as authors, and it's just like, oh, well, you're depicting Black men in a bad light, and it's like, no, I'm depicting this behavior in a bad light. If you resonate with it, maybe if the shoe don't fit, don't wear it, and if you're wearing it, maybe you should take it off.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But like I said, I'm really glad that you are writing those books and including things, because it's also that conversation that is had where it's just like, when you allow children space to see and understand and comprehend these things on their level, they become not aware of it, but like they are less likely to be pulled into situations where they don't understand, or they're walking into it blindly because they don't know. And it's just like, if you show someone what the warning signs are, they're more likely to notice what they are. And that's all that it's doing. And the fact that people get upset with the idea that, oh, you shouldn't be talking to a child about domestic violence. However, in the conversation with adults, you're like, oh, this is a situation of domestic violence, but there are children in the house. It's like,
exactly,
that child is also privy to this. So like, how do you think they are processing it? All you're doing is taking away the tools that they have to work through it in a healthy way, or to even be able to say, hey, this is a thing. I am looking for help, or just understanding or empathy, as you said.
Yeah, if I can just get one kid who is like, this person demanded that their significant other has to let them follow them on their location or something like that. I would like for, if it's my book that is the one that lets them know, hey, that could possibly be a red flag. It doesn't mean that everything is bad and evil, but now your ears are perched a little bit more, like something could be going on. So it's just like, we're writing books and they are, if anything, paths. Like they're just, maybe you want to follow that path, maybe you want to go on a different one. But at the very least, you have been introduced to something that could be dangerous. And if you have that basic introduction, it's not your first time going through it, even if it's through fiction, then maybe you'll make a better decision. Maybe you won't have to struggle as hard as the characters in the fiction book did.
Exactly. And it's just like understanding that you can move differently if you have the information to know how to move differently. It's important. And, even fiction, but like seriously, like fiction also offers so many points of understanding for actual real life experiences. And I think sometimes people forget that it's not just escapism, it's also political in a lot of ways. But all that being said, I do want to point out the comment that Ben has. And if you're listening to this and you would like to be in the conversation during the live recording of this, sign up for the Patreon. But Ben said that a lot of readers act like books can't reflect elements of real experiences. Real life is harsh sometimes, so it's nice that you're writing books that can show kids they aren't the only ones in that situation, while at the same time, those who aren't in that situation can develop empathy. It's double-sided, and it's a good thing. So I appreciate it. He appreciates it. You are appreciated, man. I want to give you your flowers.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. But that being said, your third book, like you said, is coming out November of this year, which is exciting because it's the second book in the Briarcliff Prep series. So now that you are no longer a debut, right? You've got some experience under your belt. What has that journey been like? And I kind of want to talk about it from going from a debut author, because like I said, the first book in the Briarcliff Prep series was all over my timeline. I saw it everywhere. And I was just like,
nice to hear.
Yay! And I was excited about it. I was really excited about it. But then, it got a little quieter. And I feel like that's part of the publishing journey that I would like talked about a little bit more, because it's something that we witness how debuts are treated a little bit differently in the public eye than established authors with a career. So could you speak on that? If not, I understand.
Yeah, I can speak on it carefully, like we always try to do. Marketing for Black authors still is at a deficit, I guess you could say, and that's an ongoing issue. There were a lot of people who were able to see Briarcliff Prep up and down their timelines, and I don't think it's wrong for me to say that is at the credit of myself and a lot of people who I personally was able to reach out to who helped me in that way. There were a lot of us who are brought on with we're told that people are looking for diversity, and the companies are looking for diversity and all of that, but a lot of times there's not as much backing financially as you would want. And so the visibility, especially when you are no longer the shiny new thing, dips And so I did a lot for Briarcliff Prep. And what I learned from being a debut is that I will never stress myself out like that again. I am a traditionally published author. And so my job is to write the book. My job isn't really to market the book and go on self-backed tours that I have financially backed myself. That's not my job. And my job is not to be on Canva all day long. My job is not to just do all of the extras and put thousands and thousands when in actuality, you really never know if you're going to be able to push that needle yourself. There were certain things that I was able to do. Well, my little sister, because she's more tech savvy than me, she made me that A Different World laptop closing TikTok that randomly got tens of thousands of views. And then that led to the reason that TikTok existing is the reason that my book was found by Ben Corey Jones, who is now in the process of developing it for television. That wasn't done by anybody except for me and my little sister, But at the same time, I'm not doing as much. I'm not putting as much money into it that I don't have and stuff. Because as we all know, publishing is not the big payer unless you have like some kind of different circumstance and stuff. But typically it doesn't pay us really
well.
Yeah,
I got you. I understand.
Yeah, I'm not doing as much anymore, at least not right now, because it's April. The book comes out in November. I do have a couple of things planned that I do want to do, but there's a lot of stress that comes with promoting your book, and there's a lot of stress with putting yourself out there. So a lot of us who are writers, we write because we like that solitary thing. I really am much of an introverted person. After I finish this podcast, I'm probably going to just lay down for like an hour or two to recover.
For sure.
And so when I got into it, I don't think that I understood how much interaction with other people there was going to need to be in order to get my books out there. And so I understand that we can't always be top list. A lot of us are mid-listers as far as our publishing companies or even like Amazon dictates. However, I don't know. I just can't stress myself out like that. Again, like it was a lot for debut and I did my best. But there's only so much that we can do. So I am hoping to continue my journey. I'm hoping that my publishing career will be a long one and that more people will hear about Briarcliff Prep sophomore year. I'm going to do as much as I can within keeping the real circle of sanity intact this time around. Because, yeah, like I said, it's just stressful. And so I don't want to
replicate it. I understand.
Yes.
That's valid because, I'm not traditionally published. I'm indie published. But, promoting your book as an introvert is hard because there is a lot of social interaction. There is a lot of, I don't want to say faith that you have to take on yourself because when you write a book and you decide to put it out, there's already this giant leap of faith that you have to take. But, when you start talking about financially putting things into it, it's like, oh, I have to see a return on this. Otherwise, this is not a good investment. And it's hard because, the internet moves so fast and it's just kind of like, you're essentially watching these other people and you're like, how do I do that? How do I capture lightning in a bottle? It can clearly be done, but how do I do it and how do I do it consistently? And then how do I get that to translate into you actually purchasing my book? Because being on the timeline is one thing, but it's really, and I don't think people talk about this enough, it's really hard to sell a book on social media because you're asking someone to commit hours of their time to something. It's not like music where you just can listen to the hook and be like, okay, you just have to commit to 3 minutes, 5 minutes. If you're listening to a whole album, maybe an hour, right? When you're talking about a book, it's like this has to be your sole activity for the most part. Exactly. And, you have to buy it. And book prices are not cheap these days. So it's a much harder sell, especially, when you're a Black author and you don't have like a huge following and, you don't have that one Bookstagram or a BookTube or a BookTalker to be like, oh, I love this book. All of you should also go get it. There's a lot of finagling that has to happen. And when you are naturally an introvert, which is most of us, because that's why we choose solitary careers, where it's like, oh, most of my day is spent locked in a room by myself. This is great. It's difficult. It's really difficult. So I'm kind of glad that you spoke on it, because I feel like sometimes there's this mythical idea that traditional published authors don't have to pay for their own things and put their own coins and put their own energy forth. And it's just like a lot of the authors that we usually see on the timeline are doing that by their own efforts, their own energy. So
exactly. Yeah, that was me too. Before I became a published author and signed that contract, I was like, oh goodness, I'm gonna sign this over to them and they're just gonna handle everything. Not how it goes at all. Even like things like throwing out ideas, like something that has always bothered me, which is kind of a tangent, is the way that Book Talk worked. Because the way that BookTube and Book Talk worked were completely different, and the rise of Book Talk seemed like it was going to be beautiful for us all, but the way that we were able to see that real downside for Black authors was incredible. And so when you see like these huge $1 billion publishing companies reaching out to influencers, and not just it's not just white influencers, but they're reaching out to a lot of the Black influencers to promote their white books, then it's just like, oh gosh, there's a real
disconnect.
Something's uneven here. Yeah, we're at a disconnect, all of us. Somewhere their lines are not meeting up in the middle. And so that was one of the like really tough things to understand, of how book talkers ended up being like real influencers. But the book that they were being paid to influence a lot of times were not ours. Oh, no. And are not currently still.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things up against us, but still we push through and persevere, all that fun stuff.
Yeah. And I get it to a certain extent. Like I said, I'm not in it, mostly because I'm not traditionally published. So there's obviously going to be some difference there. But, also trying to market a book and being on the front line of trying to reach out to influencers and be like, hey, I watch your content, I watch your platform. Would you be interested? It's a different hurdle, but it's a hurdle all the same. So I empathize with the struggle of being like, hey, I would like Black reviewers and Black influencers to read my book. But then, if there's always going to be a difference if, book A is by a white author and you're being sent the book and paid to create content for it, versus book 2 is written by a Black author and it's just being sent to you with the hope that you will create content for it. You're going to prioritize one over the other. And
you can't be mad at these people either, who are trying to pay their rent, pay their mortgages and stuff. It's just because I have done the same. I have reached out to a lot of the book talkers and stuff, had some lovely interactions, but at the end of the day, they're most likely going to do what pays them, and I can't really offer you the thousands that they are paying you. So I get it, but it's like you said, it's a hurdle.
Yeah, it's at the end of the day, it's a business, and I can respect that, but it's also very frustrating to be like, I kind of want it to be more of an equal playing field, but I think that's what we all want at the end of the day, and we are all stuck at the same junction. But all that to say that if you're listening to this is part of the reason why I create the Melanin Library, which is an online database of books written by Black authors to hopefully help people who would like to read diversely actually find the authors who are out here doing the Lord's work, writing diversely. So feel free to check it out, melaninlibrary.com. It's a free resource, and if you'd like to support it, there are ways to do that by joining our Patreon, which also supports the podcast and the YouTube channel and the interviews and all the things that we do to support Black authors. So that being said, we are coming up towards the end of our interview, so I have a couple more questions for you, and then I will take us out. The first question is the one that I like to ask everyone who comes on the podcast, and that is, what writing advice would you give to any new author who is just now starting out on their writing journey?
The writing advice that I would give is what I actually did when I decided that I wanted to be a writer. Maybe this is like too early, but when I was like, how do you become a writer? I Googled it. And I think it was like the WikiHow thing came up just like it does for everything else of like step by step. So I would go on WikiHow and look up how to write a book. But the more important thing that I think I did was I started to look at the names of the books that I actually love. And I started to follow these people rapidly. And I was not just following them like on Instagram and Twitter. If they had a podcast that they were on, I was listening to it, because podcasts like these, people are talking about process and how they've gone through each and every step. Something else that I think is very important if you are going to become a writer and you are looking for like that step by step, but you're like, oh gosh, I don't want to bother this author, or I don't know if they will respond, or they say no DMs or something like that. Go on these authors' websites, and a lot of us have contact forms. And if you are asking like direct questions about publishing or something, not to say that you can't figure it out yourself, but if you do have questions that you think that, hey, I want to ask an author, go to their contact forms, ask, and most likely, if you're going to get a response, you're getting a response from the author themselves. Also, Instagram stories where people put their highlights. If you go to my highlights and you are curious about things about my books or about my writing process, I have a lot of the information that people are just DMing me. I'll be like, check out my highlight, and stuff like that. I also did invest in Save the Cat, I believe. Is the title of the book. And that was like great for me personally in terms of learning how the basic structure is for most Western media. We really do follow a distinct puzzle. Like it's kind of straightforward. Yeah. So that would be my advice, to follow writers, people who are doing what you want to do in the genres that you want to be in. And contact these authors if they are willing to be contacted.
I agree. And I'm going to add the caveat to do so respectfully, and remember that they
absolutely
do not owe you anything. But a lot of authors, especially Black authors, they're very kind and they're very open. And if you have genuine questions, a lot of them are more than willing to answer those questions, as long as it's not invasive. Like, hey, who is your agent? And will you send me their email? No, don't do that. But if you have...
Don't do that. Yeah.
But if you have questions about, writing, like the process of writing and the craft of writing and, the industry, the career of writing, I think a lot of people would be open to discussing that with you. And slight plug, I also offer coaching services. So if you're interested in indie publishing, that is also something that you can talk to me about. More than happy to. But that being said, we are at the end of our podcast interview. So Brianna, if you could please let the people know where to find you on these interwebs, I will take us out.
Hi, I am Brianna Peppins, and I am the author of the Briarcliff Prep series, which are books about a girl attending a historically Black boarding school, fashioned and lightly influenced by my experience at Spelman College. I typically like to pitch it as a different world for teens. You can purchase my books by visiting my website, www.briannapeppins.com, and you can follow me on social media at Lexi_Pep. That is LEXI_PEP. Thanks for having me on the Written in Melanin podcast.
I'm so glad that you joined us. It's great to have you. And if you guys are listening to this, you know that there will be a link to all of her things down in the description box below if you're watching this on YouTube, or the show notes if you're listening to the podcast. And that is it for this episode of the Written in Melanin podcast, you guys. If you'd like to support the podcast, then please share it with someone you think may enjoy it. Join the Patreon at patreon.com/writteninmelanin, or grab a copy of my books from my website, cmlockhart.com, or you can go to Resist Books and get them from there as well. There are links in the show notes for everything, and thank you guys again so much for listening. Until next time, I hope all your books are full of melanin.